Welcome to the Outer Realm with Michelle Desrochers and Amelia Pisano. Airing live on the United Public Radio Network, 105.3 FM in New Orleans.
Welcome, everyone, to the Thursday night segment of The Outer Realm, which broadcasts right here in the United Public Radio Network, UFO Paranormal Radio Network, 105.3 and 107.7 FM from the beautiful city of New Orleans. We are fully sponsored by the amazing people over at Folgers Coffee who have been a part of our journey since the beginning. So thank you, Folgers. We appreciate you so very much. Also, big thank you for his contribution of time, music, and voice for the intro and outro. Justin Snicker, a.k.a. Dr. Snick, the Sonic Surgeon, an award-winning composer of Halloween, horror, sci-fi, and dark wave electronic music, which can be found on all of your favorite streaming platforms. Also, big thank you to Steve McGinnis, the artist behind all of our banners and logos here at the show. Check him out on Facebook and Instagram. Also specializes in the horror genre, but does amazing commission pieces. There's nothing this guy can't do. So check him out. Tonight, we welcome back a dear friend. We consider dear friend, frequent flyer for sure, Mark Olly, and all the way from the UK. So we are pre-recording this. Heads up, everybody. He's going to be talking about, oh boy, UFOs, ETs, his personal eyewitness accounts and experiences, his upcoming book, which is not going to be released right away, but we're getting a bit of a sneak peek at it, which is called Europe's Roswell, 40 Years Since Impact. That sounds exciting. I am dying to hear about that. And of course, we may just, as it often happens with Mark and I, we kind of like go in many different directions and have a lot of information to give and a lot of fun doing it. So without further ado, let's welcome Mark Olly.
Hello.
How are you?
Hi from the UK. Not too bad. It's getting bushier by the day.
Getting ready for the fall.
Yeah. I've got my red suit hanging up over there. I'm all ready
Nice.
to go. Reindeers are just revving up in the back garden.
That works. Wow.
Oh, dear.
That's a whole other side job there.
Well, yeah, if you see any unidentified flying objects around about Christmas, chances are it's me. If it's in the UK,
I love it, though.
Oh, yeah.
So how are you? How are things out there? I mean, this side of the world apparently is just like sweltering and burning and,
Well, no, we were actually doing all right. It's like people who live in Britain actually pray for global warming because we don't get a summer anymore. It's just wet permanently, and it varies from cold to reasonably cold to extremely cold. So anything over 20 degrees over here is a heat wave. I was chatting to somebody in Texas the other day, and they had 120 something degrees outside, and over here it was 22 or 23 degrees over here, and we were like, oh, well, that's great. It's quite warm. We can walk around in t-shirts.
Southern Ontario, Canada is really rainy.
Yeah.
Hot and rainy. It's ridiculous.
Yeah, I mean, we're kind of okay over here, at least because we're like a giant sponge. We're not going to burst into flames.
At least you're not burning.
Yeah, we're not. We're sort of okay.
It's a beautiful thing, all this rain, yet we burn. It's just an interesting thing to me, but it's a whole other show. So with that being said, I've been waiting for this segment because, you're so versed in many things and it's hard because I want to talk about all of it. And we have been. And this segment, I think right in time for all this buzz about disclosure and everything else again, because, that only happens every couple of years. It's become a cycle. But anyway, I thought this is going to be a fun episode. So I've talked to many people in the UK. A lot of the flying disc press people, big shout out, Philip Mantle.
Yeah. Give him a plug while there's a chance. Yeah.
Right. And there's a lot out there. So Why don't we start off with your experiences and what you want to put out there? Then we're going to talk about that amazing book that you have coming.
Okay.
Perfect.
Well, most people kind of look at me a bit weird and think, well, how on earth does someone who is, has always been a standard archaeologist, how does somebody like that suddenly cross over into the, into the UFO, the UAP community?
Right.
Well, everything has a beginning, obviously. When I was younger, in my teens, we had over here a proper heat wave. We had the summer of 1976, which was actually genuinely really hot. And I went out to a camping place, nearby local farm, in this field with a couple of my mates from school. We were all 14. We took a tent out there, and obviously the ground was baked like concrete, so we couldn't actually pitch this thing up. So you couldn't bang tent pegs in or anything like that. So we just thought, oh, blow it. It's warm anyway. We'll just top of it. So there we are in the middle of this field, gigantic, ground sheet, and we're all still in sleeping bags because it doesn't, when it gets hot, it doesn't get that hot. And we just fell asleep on top of the tent. And what I can remember, because I was out in the fields, as it were, there's not much light pollution. So I'm lying there and I'm looking up at the sky. Something woke me up in the early hours. I think it was we have foxes and badgers and things like that. I'm going to put it down to a fox. But something woke me up. So I'm there. It's probably about 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning. I'm staring up at this sky. Absolutely beautiful sky. You can see the Milky Way and everything. But what I did notice is that there's a star. It's about the size of a planet. And it's just kind of entered the star field on the horizon. And it's very, very slowly moving across the sky. Now, in the 1970s, we didn't have satellites. So I'm just wondering what on earth this thing is. I'm thinking, well, maybe it's an aeroplane or, whatever. Anyway, it just very slowly tracks across the sky till eventually it ends up pretty much right over the top of me. No change in size or anything like that. And it just cruises up like that. And as it gets level with me, suddenly it goes wallop, 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 and then back to where it was and then vanishes. Now, nothing on earth that I know of is capable of doing that, of bouncing one side of the sky to the other several times and then vanishing, disappearing because it left so quickly. So I'm just left looking at that and I'm thinking, wow, no one's going to believe this, tomorrow. And sure enough, nobody did. So I kind of buried that. Anyway, fast forward a little bit further. Now I'm sort of in my late teens, early 20s, and I became a drummer to earn a living. I was doing session work and stuff in a local studio. Session finished, early hours of the morning. I think it's the early 1980s, and there's a big hill near here that it's really good to drive up to the top of it because you can see the whole of the valley that we live in. You can see it stretching out before this hill, and then we have a river up the middle of it as well. But way over to the left-hand side of this valley is a power station. Now, in the old days, these power stations are like huge cones, and they just pump out plumes of steam all the time because they're coal-fired. There's 8 towers on this, so it's pumping out some steam, if you know what I mean. It's really sky. Anyway, and then I'm just looking out over this, this view, and I'm on top of the hill. I'm enjoying the view, and then all of a sudden, I noticed there's a light really close to the top of the tower coming through the steam. And I'm thinking, right, that's odd for a start because steam comes out, about the same temperature as a kettle. So it's, you don't fly a helicopter through that for a laugh, so it rules out a helicopter, it rules out an aeroplane. Anyway, this thing bursts through and it looks like one of the little tiny scout ships out of Close Encounters, with the lights that scan. And I think it's got one light that's changing red and then it's going blue. And then all the others that are scanning are white. Anyway, this thing silently goes up the river. And I'm thinking, this is weird. I'd already seen Close Encounters at this point. So I'm thinking, that looks like a UFO. So, of course, it's trucking its way up. And then it gets to what is the town that I live in, which is Warrington. There's like this huge, enormous bridge that goes over. And then all of a sudden, all the lights go off. And against the town lights, you just see something about the size of a decent-sized truck. And it shoots vertically up into the sky again, exactly like the one I'd seen, quite a few years beforehand. Just disappears vertically up. Anyway, I just thought that, that was
Yeah.
it. As you would, you'd think that's the encounter. Never going to hear anything about it again. Anyway, we have a local UFO hunter here called Jenny Randall. She's quite well known. She wrote a book called Mysteries of the Mersey Valley. And on the cover of this book, which then came out in the 1990s, is this flying saucer thing, this UFO coming up the Mersey. And I'm thinking, that looks familiar. So I got the book and I checked the story. And as it turns out, I wasn't the only person to see it. The first people to see it were in an aeroplane over on another county, over the other side of the river. They encountered it. They looked at it from above because they were going over the top. They were coming into Liverpool airport, so they spotted it. Then some guys camping on another hill over by Liverpool, they saw this thing, but they're looking at it sideways on. And it came zipping past them. And then it was spotted flying across Liverpool towards, guess where? The power station.
Right.
So what I saw was the next bit where it comes whizzing through the power station, goes along the Mersey Valley, lights go out, and it disappears. Anyway, it took this is absolutely amazing because it took 32 years to put that story together.
Wow.
To piece it all together. Because obviously I had my encounter seeing it coming this way. Then there was all the information Jenny had to put together for the book, and the book had to come out, which came out about 10 years after what had happened. Then I eventually got the book, and I eventually stumbled on what was in that because I didn't know it had ever been written up as a case. So what I've done is I've strung all of that together, and the first couple of chapters in the new book, which is advertised on the zip line going across the bottom there, which is Europe's Roswell, 40 years since impact. It's the introduction section to that book because I think it's about time that as an encounter was, written up and published. I mean, I've got to say it's not the only encounter I've had. I mean, when you're out doing archaeology, you'd be surprised because you're out on all these different locations. You have barbecues.
But that's what makes it incredible, Mark, because there is a theory. Now, it's just a theory that some ufologists believe that not everyone sees them. Even, there have been reports of people standing in the same area together, and they're like, "What are you looking at? It's one of these." And everybody stops. It's like, what is it? But it's believed that if you are a contactee or experiencer, that you will see them regularly throughout your life.
Yeah. There's two other stories, though.
Let's do it.
One of the stories kind of goes with that, and another one kind of goes against it. The one that goes against it was, I was just saying, as an archaeologist, we were doing a dig in Buxton, which is in Derbyshire. That's another county not far from here. And we were having a barbecue, and I'd gone inside to get something, the coleslaw or whatever. And all of a sudden, one of the team comes running in, this lady, white as a sheet. And she's saying, "You're not going to believe this, but we've just been buzzed by a UFO. Something's just buzzed us." And everybody saw it. Except me, because I was in the house, but we got buzzed. So stuff like that does happen, and you do get lots of people seeing it. But the other one that springs to mind, and this is a brilliant story. It's not in the book. It's something separately. Around about the same time, the 1980s, I had a friend whose mum was a little bit weird. Everybody said, "Oh, she's odd. She has visions and dreams and things like this." And one day, this friend of mine came to me and said, "My mum really wants to speak to you because you're an ist." I said, "Well, I'm an archaeologist. I'm not a scientist or a physicist or a chemist. But he wants to speak to you because you might appreciate, what she's got to share." So I said, "Oh, okay." Anyway, I went round to his house. Now, this particular lady was, how can I put it? She'd never really learned to read or write. She was quite severely disabled. I think she was dyslexic, dyspraxic, autistic. There were other problems going on, which is why everybody thought she was weird, because she just blurt this stuff out. Anyway, I walked in and she's calmly sitting there, and she just starts off with this story. And she said, "I was, sleeping in my bed last night, and there was a breeze came in through the window, and the curtains swayed, and then this green figure materialized in front of me and had big black eyes," and she proceeded to describe an alien. Now, at this point, of course, I'm kind of sharp intake of breath. Where's this going? What's she going to say? Anyway, she then went on. She said, "The reason I've asked you to come down is because the alien told me to write some things down." Now I'm like, ooh, now that's interesting.
Yes.
Anyway, she kept notebooks at the side of the bed, and she'd be writing down every time these things had come in, everything that they were saying. Now, I am only an archaeologist. I'm not like, I'm not like Einstein or Tesla or whatever. But I can tell you the stuff that was in these notebooks. There was black hole theory, wormhole theory, formula I've never seen the like of, all sorts of stuff in these books.
Mm-hmm.
So that convinced me that actually she was getting visited and there was information being dictated to her.
Mm-hmm.
But she was the only one that saw them. So back to where you came in. Nobody else ever saw them. Nobody else encountered them. But they were passing information on to her because there was something unique about her that enabled her to write this data down. Now, the sad part of it is she didn't survive very much longer after I spoke to her. And I lost contact with the family, and I don't know what happened to the notebooks. And I regret that. I really wish I could have, made copies, or I was back in the days before mobile phones and all that, having cameras.
Well, I mean, maybe they are known to come down and give messages, dire messages to humanity, and direction, and do this, don't do this. This is going to happen. This is, so it is a real shame because
this was technology, and it was physics and chemistry, and stuff you could actually get to grips with, proper formula and stuff like that.
Makes you wonder why they would have chosen her for this sort of information.
Back to what you said about some people can see them and some people can't. And I always put it down to there was always something odd about her, and I caught her on a good day. So, we had a good sit down over a cup of tea, and she had these notebooks with her. So that was a good day, but she had bad days as well.
Right.
And it wouldn't surprise me if, she didn't die of something related to her condition. But that kind of put her in a different place,
Yes.
So that facilitated the communication somehow. But,
I think it's fantastic because I've read stories, and from the UK actually, of of this happening to people. I'm sure they have stories like this everywhere, but I think it's like anything with Europe and the United Kingdom, England. Everything comes out like they're way ahead of us in a lot of ways. You guys are more open to this, spiritualism and the paranormal and parapsychology and, all of that stuff. It takes the West a little bit of time to catch up. So I think that people felt more comfortable in talking about it.
In other words, we've always been weird over here.
Yeah, but I like it, man. It's a good weird. I have family in England,
weird, so we colonized the world with weird.
Yeah, I've got some of that weird British blood too. I love it.
Excellent. But there is a link, actually. The reason I told you those stories, there is a link between that, because everything I've just told you took place here in the Northwest. Right. And there is actually, if you go sort of out through Liverpool Bay and then down the coast, you'll end up in what is effectively a UFO triangle. And it's the Cardigan Bay, North Wales UFO kind of triangle. There's a big area there, Snowdonia, which is very little habitation in Wales. And so much happens. They've seen things like UFOs coming up out of the bay. The Coast Guard has a hotline to the local RAF base, and every time they see them come up, they just phone them. So, it's that regular, literally, the locals have got arrangements with people, and,
I love that though.
Well, that's how we ended up with. We ended up on Here's My Chance to Have a Plug. That's how we ended up with that.
Yeah, let's do it. Yes.
Yeah, Europe's Roswell, 40 years since impact. That's why the stories I have ended up as the introduction to that.
Right.
Because they link directly to this North Wales, Cardigan Bay, Liverpool Bay triangle. Because I live in the Mersey Valley, so I'm between Liverpool and Manchester.
Right.
So these beggars are, buzzing back and to in all directions over us all the time. Right. So I'm actually surprised I haven't seen more of them.
I agree. I agree. So let's segue into that. Let's start with the triangle. Tell us about the lore and the stories that come out of the triangle, because we know UFOs are a real big part of that.
Yes. Well, gosh, there are so many stories relating to that North Wales triangle.
Right.
The one that sticks in my mind, there's a couple of good ones, but the real belter was I used to go around, I still do go around doing talks about the history of UFOs. And what I do is when I get to the end of it, I finish with the story of this crash in North Wales that triggered off this book. And I was doing one of these talks in North Wales, and this sort of fairly young lass came up and she said, oh, round about the time that happened, early 1980s, she said, I was an art student at Aberystwyth, which is on the coast. And she said, I woke up one morning and I looked out of me digs window, you know, where the place she was staying. And she looked out of the window and she said, and I saw this thing coming up out of the bay. And she said, so what I did was, she said, I'm an art student, so I had a camera handy. She said, I grabbed the camera and I took a photo of it. So at that point, you know, my instinct was to say, yes, here's my email, send me a copy of the photo, you know, or here's my address,
Right.
send me a photo. And I never heard anything back. So that was the sad end.
Oh.
But she was a witness to one of these things. And the guy who actually ran the crash retrieval team that got bits, which triggered this book, got bits off the crash near Aberystwyth.
Wow.
He actually has experiences of seeing them, and he knows people who have also had experiences of seeing them. And I only learned fairly recently from him. I mean, I've known him a while. I've known him about 25, 30 years now. He only recently confessed that when he was younger as a teenager, what got him into it, because he lives in the area of this triangle, he said something was happening outside his house when he was a teenager.
I bet.
All these
I
lights,
live in the triangle. Sure.
noises, you know, things are shaking and things like that. And he said, so I didn't know what it was. So he said he went outside and there was a flying saucer, a UFO sat over his house, which then dropped, it descended into the space that was his front garden in front of his house. And he said he was only about 8 or 10 feet away from this thing. And he said it was totally silent. He said you couldn't feel anything.
How
you
big,
couldn't
how
hear
big is
anything.
this thing? How does something like that just land in your garden?
Well, in this country, the front gardens, especially in Wales, can be quite large spaces.
True.
Reasonably.
Yeah.
So I suppose, again, about the size of a small truck, you know, or a large van.
Right.
And it's just kind of sat there in midair over his front garden. And he said there was this face-off for quite a few minutes. And he said, while he's there, the neighbours across the road come out and they stand there looking at this thing, you know.
Right.
And then he said it just very silently rose up and vanished over the roof of his house. So I don't know whether that's a first encounter, a second encounter, or a third kind. I don't know. I'm assuming it's the second kind, you know, where you get so close to these things that they actually, you know, you can physically, tangibly know that they're there. Nothing. He didn't see any green men. Nothing got out, you know, or anything like
It just landed, had a look.
Yeah, it just came down, said hi, and left. You know.
I can imagine living within a triangle. You hear all kinds of things because it's essentially like, I mean, your opinion of that as to why there's so much activity at all the triangles around the world. Like, are they portals? Are they? What's so significant about that the like this one, the activity is just so like tenfold?
Well, there's a couple of things that I've noticed. The first thing is that, as I say, Snowdonia as an area, that part of North Wales, and the bit that kind of butts up against Cardigan Bay, that is very sparsely populated. I mean, it's not as bad as Scotland. I mean, nobody lives in parts of Scotland.
I know. Go to Scotland. You want to be left alone? Go to Scotland. This
particular bit of Wales, there's not a lot going on. So you could fly in and out of that area and you know, in reasonable safety. But then again, you've also there's a couple of military bases there because obviously the military are interested in that area. So you've got that common factor, which is common with other things like this. And then also to the north of it, you've then got this hugely populated area, which is where I live, with Liverpool and Manchester and Leeds. And, you know, it's just covered in people. So if I was an alien and I wanted to hide at the bottom of the sea, but every now and again I wanted to pop up and see what the population was doing, you couldn't really get a better place to do it than Cardigan Bay, because you can pop up, zoom around Wales a bit and go to wherever it is you want to get to, and then go and have a look. You know, you could come up the Mersey Valley like this thing did that I saw, and just have a look and see what we were doing, So we get it all the time here.
Well, I have to ask then with military bases, because, there's, let's face it, I mean, especially in modern times, it would be easier to accept things before flight, before man could fly. Let's face it. You see something, I mean, you go back into ancient times, there's reports of them all over the place. But, once man started flying, and especially to the point where we are at now, where there's alleged reverse engineering, so on and so forth, do you think that there's more of ours than actual ET? Or do you think, because I mean, this is pretty much what they're saying. Yes, we have, this is part of the big disclosure coming up this side of the world. Yes. We know they're there. We've reverse engineered some of it, and it's like, we knew it. So, So what's your take on that? Because 2 military bases,
there's a couple of them. They're dotted all over the place where we are. Well, I'll start with the story. I obviously have told these stories to various people at various times, and I had a friend who was training for the military, training for the army, and his specialist thing was computing, but he was a little bit of a wild character. And he disappeared off into military training, and then he came home after a bit, and he took me on one side and he said, "You're going to love this." I said, "Oh, why is that?" He said, "Oh, well," he said, "I'm a hacker. I'm a computer hacker, and they left me alone on a military terminal." He said, "So you can imagine." You can imagine what that's. He's like, he's like a kid in a sweet shop. It's all there in front of him. Yes. He said, so I did 2 things. He said, the first thing I did was, he said, I headed straight for the Vatican Library, where the Jesuits have got computer access to what the Vatican's got. Anyway, he said, military terminal, British Army, logged in. He said, I lasted 30 seconds before they locked me out. So that was it. Waste of time.
30 whole seconds.
Yeah, he said the other story's more interesting. He said, because I then went off looking for UFOs, and he said I found one. He said they've got a hangar with one in down south. Now, subsequent to this, there have been other people who've come out and said there are hangars with these things in, and I think the place that he mentioned where this was has now been disclosed as a place where they take that kind of thing to. But then that again feeds into Europe's Roswell, the book, because if we physically had something we could reverse engineer, that's what we do. Well, the answer is we do, because I think I can get that closer there. See that material there?
Yes.
That is part of the crash debris. It gets shown in quite high detail in the book. I mean, as you can see, there's lots of pictures of that.
That's amazing.
This metal bit here was analysed by Gary and his recovery team back in the 1990s. That is a very advanced alloy of duralumin. Now, in 1983, we didn't have duralumin. Now we do. So there you go. You see. Now the other question is, what is the rest of this? Because all these hexagons and whatnot, that's not been analysed yet. So that's something that we are actively working on. All I'm allowed to say really is that's going to delay the book from August, when it was its original release date. We're going to delay it through to November. So the book is actually coming out on the 1st of November, in the hope that we can answer the question as to what the rest of that material is. So there's a couple of labs dotted around, and they're all having a go at trying to sort out what it is. Which we never thought would ever happen. I mean, Gary's been very good over the years in keeping hold of the 6 pieces of material that they recovered. He's obviously, he's held on to them as tightly as he possibly could, even though the military did send the Men in Black round to collect as much as they could, but he wasn't having any, and they didn't get any of it. So he's managed to hang on to it. But anyway, he sent a couple of samples through for us to analyse. So hats off again to Philip at Flying Disc Press for making it all possible. Hopefully we're going to nail it this side of Christmas. We'll know what it is. But back to reverse engineering, it's that Men in Black thing, isn't it, where they go into the lab and it's like, Teflon and anti-gravity, and he touches that little ball and it shoots all over the place and destroys the whole lab, and and all sorts of different types of metal, different different substances, a lot of stuff in computers, and if Roswell was when we think it was, which is 1947, although I have to say there's a possibility another craft crashed 10 years before that. But if we go from 1947, imagine what you could do with that technology in 90 plus years. Now, 90 years is a long time, It
is a long time.
And the technological gap between what we as humans regard as normal and what they're developing is going to get bigger and bigger and bigger. So you do end up with this question, is it us or is it them,
Well, I mean, the 90-year mark is interesting because you often hear comments such as, well, they're a good 100 years ahead of us. We're 100 years behind. I mean, let's face it, you make a discovery. Of course, you want to engineer it. You want to understand it. You want to, grab hold of it, make it your own. That's normal. I mean, they've been doing this since the dawn of time, when tribes sitting there making fire, the other tribe like, I want in, you do it. I don't understand why. I mean, obviously a control thing as to why being so secretive about it. Everybody knows that their thing crashed. There's a balloon. No, we're not idiots, for God's sakes. Then you start threatening people. It's just like, I think had they just left it alone, it would have been a tale that died out.
Yeah.
But because of all the bullying and all of the control, people, I mean, we're like kids. We always want to touch the hot element on the stove. We always want to know what's going on when we see something, explain it. I think had they done that, it would be a whole different situation, and we wouldn't be fighting disclosure now.
I don't know. I almost sympathize with them because you've just come out of the Second World War, and I really don't think anybody knows exactly what happened in the Second World War. Nobody knows for sure what the Germans were up to, and what came out directly as a result of, what they were doing. Right. For example, just as a quick one, a lot of the medical procedures which came out of the concentration camps form the basis of what we now know as regular standard medicine. But if it all came out as to where that came from, that one piece of PR, negative PR, would do so much damage that medicine would then grind to a standstill and probably start to slip backwards. Well, the same thing is probably true of technology. If we suddenly discovered that time isn't what we thought it was, and the world isn't solid because it's dimensional, and light doesn't function the way it does, life doesn't function the way it does, if it affects life and death and the entire universe then just suddenly collapses, I don't think most of mankind would have coped with that in the 1940s. Especially, 1950s, did we reverse engineer rock and roll? There's all these guys running around in the desert, playing to the tune of a steam train, in all these cars with these big bumpers. That's what I'm saying.
Let's look at technology that is out in the open being engineered, and I don't understand. Like they should, just do it. We all know. But then you have those who say, well, at least on this side of the world, and I'm sure everywhere to a degree, let's face it, but you have the U.S. military that's had, or governments that allegedly, I'll say allegedly, there were arrangements with Grays to, yes, go ahead, abduct our people. Well, now if you admit it, you also have to admit to your people everything else.
That you've lied, you've kept it concealed.
It's a bit of a predicament.
Arrangements, with them and things like that. It's like I say, I sympathise with them. It's a pretty big ask. They dug an enormous hole for themselves right at the beginning, but then it was the lesser of the two evils, I think, at the beginning. And I think with the wonderful world of Hollywood and science fiction and what have you, I think maybe now
hasn't helped.
Well, maybe now we're ready for it. Maybe in some ways we've been conditioned now to, I mean, if some alien, leads the staggering President Biden out onto the front of the White House lawn, and he says, well, I've got something to say here about America, my daughter, or whatever else he comes out with, the alien will probably say, hey, guess what? We're
here.
All right, we're here. So that conceivably could now happen, maybe. But then Years
Then-
ago, when people were channeling things through from aliens back in the 70s, the 80s, the 90s, a lot of people got messages to say, don't believe the first thing you see.
Oh, yes.
The message was,
Yes.
the fake will come first. So
Yes.
chances are the grey is something that's been genetically engineered in a lab. You know, it could be illusions that are being created by projections or whatever. The ships could be stuff that we've developed but not told anybody about, you know. And all of a sudden, wow, we're in this world full of aliens. And in actual fact, they're not. And the thing that came through was they're going to come through in the second wave. They'll come back as the second revelation. So watch out for the fake. And then the real thing will come through at a later.
It's kind of like a religious story I know about this. You know, did I say that? Sorry.
Are you allowed to say a second coming? You're allowed to say that.
See, you're the guest. You can say things I can't. But
see, I can because I'm a vicar. So there you go.
No, but it is interesting, metaphorically speaking. You know, it's not meant to just, you know, to be disrespectful, but metaphorically speaking, it sounds like the same idea. So it looks like, you know, we're going to be dealing with Project Bluebeam and false flags. And I mean, let's face it, war makes money. You have to keep fear to have war. So that's the next big thing, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, I've fallen off the edge of the world, literally. Not that it's flat, but I've dropped off the edge of it. But anyway, that's another conversation for another day. But I'm not a flat earther. I think it around. But anyway, that's a long story. But I've fallen off the edge of it anyway, because I'm at the point where, you know, angels, giants, Nephilim, demons, you know, anything coming from God, aliens, you know, you name it, X-Files, whatever. Interdimensional, I think, is the key. I think whichever way you go, you know, it tells you in the Bible that heaven is heaven. It's not here, it's somewhere else. So however you argue it, no matter what religion you follow or faith or no religion or science or however you look at it, whatever's happening is coming from somewhere else, you know.
But heaven was another word for sky as well.
Well, yeah, I mean,
a lot of misinterpretation.
Yeah, probably the reason why I finished up on ancient aliens is not because I necessarily agree with everything they say.
Sure.
But I am at the point where anything that doesn't physically live here qualifies as an extraterrestrial, you know. So I'm totally behind that thing that Eric started back in the 1960s and 70s. You know, I do go with that, but I'm not sure about, you know, Jesus coming back in a flying saucer. You know, that doesn't quite sit right with me. But
no, I think that would throw a bit of turmoil. I mean, I think if you have people who are strong, faithful people, and if you want to even remotely say, look, you know, the Creator created many.
Yeah,
that's easy to digest. Yes, we're on one planet. There's created many planets. Therefore, create many beings. Okay, we could take that. But I think, and it's been done, if you try and say that he was an alien, you're going to lose all those people because that's not something they're ready to digest. Whether it is or is not, who knows? I mean, you do amazing things. You know, maybe you have exceptionally gifted people from other places who come in dimensionally, and they can do all this incredible stuff.
You've almost got to reverse the conversation. You've got to say, okay, hang on a minute. You've got Jesus. He dies. He comes back 3 days later. He's clearly not the same kind of human because he's not. He's a, you know, he can change form. He can come as a child or an adult. He can pass through locked doors. He's not bleeding.
Pretty incredible human to start with, though. So you know,
but he's not bleeding from his injuries. And when he leaves, he vanishes up through the clouds. He ascends,
teleports.
So exactly. So you read that and you think, well, hang on a minute. That's actually more wacky than anything that the UFO guys are saying, you know.
Right.
And why could a creator not create more different types of life forms? Why not?
Well, advanced life forms. I mean, they try to teach us now, evolve, because you're these incredible, you know, soul beings who are having this big human experience. Like, but you can, you know, they tell us we have the abilities and I'm not comparing us to Jesus Christ or any, God or anything like that. But
Jesus actually said, he said, all these things I'm doing, he said, you'll do this and more.
Okay, see, there you go. So we that tells me we even back then, 2,000 years ago, they're preaching, you can do this.
Yeah.
And I think, we've been dumbed down. A lot of us can't. A lot of people can do pretty amazing things. I mean, there are natural born healers, who have practiced, they realize you can do it and you practice it, you evolve it, and you have really gifted individuals who can do pretty amazing things. And I guess 2,000 years ago, they might have looked at people like that and went, wow, look at you two ways. One, like, wow, you're the village healer, or we're going to burn you at the stake. Something's wrong.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly.
So we live in this time 2,000 years later, and we still have difficulty. We talked about this on the show last night, actually. Yeah. We still have this difficulty swallowing a lot of this stuff that's coming forward. So
well that discussion's been had in the alien community as well, because
that's
what they're saying is, well, maybe that's the reason the aliens are not revealing themselves. They're not showing themselves because they are so much more advanced. But we come in peace, bang. You know what I mean? They're not going to last 2 minutes with us lot.
Yeah, shoot first, ask questions later. That's what you're saying.
And so that discussion's been had as well. Maybe that's why these guys don't reveal themselves, or they're extremely fussy about who they show themselves to, because they've got to establish that contactee is not a threat. I think that goes right across the board. I mean, I've studied a lot of UFO material going right the way back to the 40s, 50s and beyond. And that seems to be a common factor. You can ask anybody who's been abducted, third and fourth encounters. They've met these things. They've been in the ships, they've been talked to. They've had messages given to them, etc., etc. The common denominator right across the board is these individuals don't pose a threat.
Right.
No matter how threatening they may be, they could be carrying guns and things like that, but they're not going to use them. So clearly the aliens know beforehand, or these beings, or the angels, or interdimensional, they can tell. They can tell beforehand pretty much what they're dealing with.
We're the kids in the sandbox that don't play nice.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And we've got far too many dangerous toys as well. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. Which makes you, again, goes back to, well, there were certain races out there of extraterrestrials that don't play nice in the sandbox either, and are letting the kids play with all of that stuff. And here we are, Not all beings are love and light.
In as much as we're a mixed planet, I think you could say it's a mixed universe.
Yes.
That diversity that we find here, which actually is decreasing, that diversity must be everywhere. And some of the diversity would literally just pop our heads. We wouldn't be able to cope with some of the things that are out there, which I think is the reason why you always get the same kind of form of alien. They come in a form that we can find acceptable, 2 arms, 2 legs, a head and a body. They don't come as jellies, or gas clouds, or, things covered in tentacles, because they know we wouldn't respond well.
So they project something that is appealing to us or accepting to us. It's easier to look for, for me, because I'm a contactee. I'm an experiencer. I've had, an experience of the fourth or fifth kind easily. Yeah. I basically just turned around and there's one standing right in front of me in my own house. I'm kind of like, can I poke you?
Clearly you're not a threat. So there you go. Yeah.
I didn't feel threatened. I just rolled over and I went, nope. Not doing it. Sorry. Nope. That was it.
You see, my friend, that lady that has the notebook, she had the opposite. She pretty much sort of grabbed hold of this thing and went, tell me more, See? I want to know,
I wasn't thinking, Mark. I wasn't thinking.
Oh, dearie me.
I would do it differently. I get downloads and stuff. So I would do it differently now. I think I am doing it differently. But I think there's just some things that are more pleasing to us than others. I think even in life, if you see anything, like it's easier to look at, for me, it's easier to look at a tall, white, or gray, or a light being than it would be to look at, let's say, a mantis that's like 10 feet tall. I don't even really like them on the lawn.
No.
Do you know what I'm saying? Sometimes there's a little wiggier looking than others. So, or a big reptilian. I might have a hard time with that. If I like them, I'd have an iguana. But seriously, you know, like some things are startling. I won't say,
Yeah.
you know, look, I don't say that they're ugly. There's beauty in everything,
Yeah.
and I truly believe there's beauty in everything. But some things are just a little more frightening than other things,
Yeah.
and I think we as society are not ready for something that's, you know, like 100 times the size of your iguana.
Yeah. I mean, we're wired to defend ourselves against anything that we
Fight or
perceive as a
flight,
threat.
right?
Yeah,
Yes.
which hasn't gone well for other species over the decades. So it
No.
certainly isn't going to go well with any new ones, I wouldn't think. You know.
Right.
Do you want me
Right.
to tell you the story of Europe's Roswell? Actually, I've not really told you about the actual
Let's
crash
do that,
itself.
and then let's
Yeah.
start getting into some more stories with the book.
Yeah, okay. Well, basically, the story goes that Gary he ran a research, a UFO research group that was trying to catalogue all of the things that were going on in the early 80s. And he got a newspaper clipping through from a news agency in 1983, I think I'm right in saying. And basically what it said is, there's been a UFO crash. And it only appeared in one newspaper. When I did a documentary on this back in 2008, we went back to the original person that wrote the article, and they couldn't find out where they got the story from. So it's just this one article. So basically, Gary knew the farmer on whose land this thing had crashed. So he contacted the farmer, and the farmer basically gave him the same story as the one in the article, that he got up one morning, came out to tend sheep, and there was this huge, great 25-foot wide like swathe of woodland that had been cut through, and then the fields immediately in front of this sweeping cut were then completely covered in debris. He's talking about 4 fields, you know, with big sheets of this metal substance. Some of it's as big as 4 feet, 5 feet, 6 feet. Anyway, it's a lot of debris. So basically, this farmer then phones the police. The police know nothing. He phones the local MOD. They don't know anything. So about a couple of hours after he'd phoned the MOD, of course, this crash recovery team turns up. But it's more than just a crash recovery team. You know, there's plainclothes guys ordering uniformed officers around, you know, and clearly it's a proper cleanup. And it drags on right through the night. They keep going through the night with it. So when he gets up the following day, there's nothing there, but Gary is still coming with his recovery team. So the farmer phones Gary and says, look, they've been down here, they've cleaned everything up. You know, we're not sure you're going to find anything. So when Gary arrives, he has a look at this and he thinks, right, the trees. I bet you they haven't got everything out of the woods. So he heads into the woods, and that's where he gets these 6 fragments. He gets a couple of bits of foil and then this metal, this duralumin stuff, which he then gathers together and takes away. And he says to the farmer, he says, look, give it a week or two, you know, and we'll come back and we'll do the same thing again with metal detector machines and all that, and we'll see what else we can find. Anyway, a couple of days later, gets a phone call off the farmer. You're not going to believe this. They're demolishing the wood. They're clearing it away.
Oh, no.
Yeah, so the Forestry Commission come in and they cleared the woodland. So by the time I came to doing the documentary in 2008, it was exactly the same situation as you had at Roswell. Because you had the initial newspaper reports, you had the initial witness who was a farmer.
Right.
The debris had all been cleared, so that there was no way of me as an archaeologist going and digging anything up. Whatever it was had either flown off or been cleared away. So there was no craft, there was no alien bodies, none of that. It had all gone. And that was it. So we were in the same position then in 2008 as Roswell. So we called it Europe's Roswell. The documentary came out, I think it's on Amazon Prime. I think you can still find it out there. And it's just called Europe's Roswell, you know, UFO crash with. So that documentary's out there. It doesn't really say anything different from what the book's going to say. The big difference is, though, we can update. I think that came out on the 25th anniversary of the crash, and this one's coming out on the 40th. So we've done all the legwork that we couldn't do back then. We've gone for, you know, freedom of information.
Well, you know more now too, and yes, that's right. You have more access to that information.
Yeah.
So, as an archaeologist, is this something you like? Have you gone to the site?
Yeah, it was a bit of a laugh, really. I mean, Gary had a go at me the other day. Well, it's quite a few weeks back, and he said, "Well, you never put Irwell in the documentary. That's the farmer." Well, we did actually go and we had a look, and it was in January. So you can imagine you got this enormous flat valley, and it's full of sheep. Right. And it's white because it's covered in snow. So there's about a minute at the beginning of the documentary. There's this panning shot, you know, where we're talking over it. Yes. And that's it. That's the only thing that's there. There's nothing left. There's no woods. There's nothing like that. And we were going to load the cameras out and do an interview with Irwell. And he just said, well, you wasted your time. He said, I'm only going to tell you exactly the same thing I told the newspaper reporters when we did that originally. And he said, all I saw was a pile of stuff in a field. He said, that was it. He said, I can't tell you anything more. And he didn't really want the location giving away. Obviously, he didn't want the actual physical appearance of his farm. He didn't want that appearing. The woods had gone. So obviously you couldn't film it from the road because when we did, it was just a white sheet, just this white thing of snow. So I was just like, okay, we'll use the newspaper report. You know, we'll go off the source material that was done at the time. And he had nothing to add. There was nothing else to add to it. His memory,
he never kept anything. See, I would have been so curious.
He never did. Yeah.
Yes. Like you see something like that. Did he know it was otherworldly, or did he just think like somebody just crashed on his property?
Well, up to the point where Gary turned up to that point, Irwell was convinced it was an aircraft. He thought it was an aircraft that had hit the trees.
That would explain it.
And in 83, the public weren't as aware of the existence of drones. So if you look at a drone's wingspan, if that went flying through a woods, it would take about 20 to 25 foot wingspan off.
Right.
But, and this is the kicker, he didn't see any craft. So whatever it was dumped all of this material over 4 fields, tons of it, and then it flew off. Yeah, it just went. So that's what really puzzled him. But he said up to Gary arriving and finding this duralumin, up to that point, he assumed it was all aircraft debris. He said there were a couple of bits that looked a bit like beams, like girders, and something that looked a bit like an aerial. But he couldn't swear to exactly what any of it was. There was no writing, no markings, no insignia. You know, nothing you'd normally associate with something that was military. Just all this stuff. You know, this strange foil material and duralumin sheet. Now, I've subsequently, when I was doing the documentary, I did some research in the 2008. They were using duralumin on the control surfaces on aeroplanes. So the flaps that tell the aeroplane where to go, that's got quite a primitive form of duralumin in it. But the guys at British Aerospace said, well, you know, ours is not a patch on what you've fished off that field. You know, we'd very much look to get hold of something, you know, sample that we can make. So they were already, British Aerospace were thinking of reverse engineering it when Gary sent his samples in for analysis in the 1990s.
Did he ever get his samples back?
Actually, he did. He actually did.
Lucky.
Back. So yeah.
Wow.
They're only tiny. They're only like, you know, fingernail size. But he managed to get them back, fortunately, after they've been tested. But all that the British Aerospace guys would say is it's a really pure alloy of duralumin. We don't know what the grey stuff is. That's some kind of resin. We don't know what the paint is. We don't know what the hexagonal rubbery stuff is. You know, and they weren't sent any of the foil, so they didn't test the foil. So there's at least another 3 or 4 things attached to that metal that we haven't got a clue. They just said that we don't know what it is. We can tell you what it's made of. We know what the elemental components are, but we've never seen anything like it. It's not a substance that we think is being made. So, and that was way back then. So what new results are going to be, we don't know. You know, it's going to be quite exciting.
Do you even chance it now, knowing?
Well, the samples that have been sent off are only tiny, and they've gone to laboratories that don't have connections to the military. I can say that. They're not military labs. Right. And hopefully they'll have gone under closed conditions, and they'll come back under closed conditions. You know, that's how we kind of do it. Right. Which I think is probably the reason why Philip, you know, was going to try and keep the analysis a secret. But I can't keep things like that a secret. You know what I'm like? Good on it, you guys, you know.
I know that it is hard.
If the analysis ends up coming back later than the 1st of November, what we'll do is we'll publish the book And then if the analysis came, say, in January or whatever, or February, we will then publish the analysis as a follow-up. We are going to go public with it. So it's not a conspiracy or anything. It just means it took them longer than we thought it would, if that happens.
Right. That's a real tough one. But at least it seems that people are at least willing to talk about it. Like the farmer wasn't told, don't talk to anybody.
No,
do you see the differences? Like you are able to get analysis. You are able to go to the location. You are able, there's so much that you're able to do, whereas not like that in the US, more secretive.
No, that's the, there we go. That's the foil, two pieces of the foil debris.
Wow.
This kind of proves the point about the book as well. I mean, when we did the DVD, obviously that's sold like the clappers, so there are no DVDs now. You won't be able to get that anywhere. Right. And if you want to actually be able to study it, then you need a hard copy. So we'd actually never got round to doing the hard copy version. So this has been, a long time coming and very much needed. So as I think I put it on the back here, you could have 10,000 books on UFOs on your bookshelf, but you won't have this because this is the last chapter. This will probably be the last book to go out before disclosure that actually shows you parts of a UFO. Right. It's not little wobbly lights or, a blurred shot of something whizzing across the sky or, somebody.
This is hard evidence of something.
Hard evidence. And physically, we show you in the book, there are lots of proper show and tell photographs in there. So you can decide for yourself what it is or what it isn't,
I think it's important because there's going to be a lot of he said, she said, a lot of speculation. You've got people now. I mean, there are people out there now. It's already starting and they haven't full on disclosed 100% anything. And they're already saying, oh, these ships are swarming the military. Military is under attack. The Navy's under attack. It's just like the propaganda that's going to come with all of this is going to be really difficult for people to make up their minds, to digest anything. Let's face it. We all have one of these for the most part, right? Yeah. Cell phone and pretty sophisticated cameras. They're like little mini computers. I mean, God, that phone has more of a hard drive than my computer has. Like it's just ridiculous.
Mine doesn't.
See, you got a smart one for real.
Yeah, I've got buttons here. Look, real buttons.
I know. That's a smart thing. I know people who keep saying this smartphone goes. I'm going back to the old flip phones. I'm thinking I've kept all my flip phones.
I've got ones before this. I think I've got a 1980s Nokia somewhere. The scrap gold's worth more than the phone.
It's terrible. I hoard that stuff. My technology. I'm a technology nerd, but I think they're very sophisticated. People have taken incredible photographs. I actually watched a documentary that went back to the 80s or 90s on Amazon just yesterday, and they were showing UFOs caught on camera, and yet with the old video cameras, and they're more compelling than a lot of things that I have actually seen recently.
Well, the wonderful world of CGI, they can do absolutely anything now. They're at that point, you can make an entire Hollywood movie now and never leave the hangar, never leave the studio.
That's true.
So it's in a sense, it's a shame because when I do my talk, The History of UFOs, I actually stop in the 1990s because when you get into the 2000s, it just goes silly. It's ridiculous. You can't tell the wood from the trees. But I have got some belters in that talk. I've got some absolute humdingers from like you say, from 60s, 70s, 80s. There were some great photographs that are really, really impossible to explain, So something has clearly been going on and going on for a long time,
Right, right. Well, as an archaeologist, have you... you don't have to answer, but it'd be nice. Have you found any artifacts or out of place artifacts or hieroglyphs or etchings, petroglyphs that lean towards extraterrestrials or UFO encounters by people of the areas that you've excavated?
There's kind of, how can I put it? there's a number of answers to that question, so I'll wade in.
Okay.
I had a big thing early on as a teenager to study things like UPARTs, which are the out of place exotic objects that turn up. Things like a hammer in a block of stone, and a gold bracelet in a piece of coal, and all that. And I believe that a majority of those finds are actually probably genuine, because I think we had this period of previous civilizations. Agreed. And occasionally that turns up. So in terms of have I found anything that falls into that category, the thing that absolutely blew me away, going all the way back to 2004, I was over in Egypt, and I ran across these strange drilling holes that you find in Egypt, where they've gone all the way through 100 yards of rock, and it's just a perfect hole. And I've encountered all the different varieties of those drilling holes. I've encountered them firsthand, and I've stood on that giant obelisk that's in the granite quarry in Aswan as well. I've actually stood on that and gone underneath it and had a look at it, and the stonework is just absolutely mind-boggling. But since then, I've also been to Romania, I've been to Italy, I've been to North Africa, I've been to South America. I've been all over the place, over the place, and you begin to find commonality. So in terms of what I've physically discovered, I mean, I own a crystal skull as well. So in terms of things like that are way, way off the scale, I've had a lot of experience, first-hand experience of touching and, experiencing and being with these objects over the years. So yes, I've over the last sort of, 15, 20 years, loads like that. In terms of me going down a hole in the UK with a trowel and digging up an alien or whatever, that's never actually happened. I haven't pulled out from somewhere something that hasn't been seen before, probably with the only exception of these pieces of metal, these strange bits of duralumin. Obviously I was responsible for doing an identification on these as an archaeologist and investigating the site and having a look at that as a case and then producing the documentary on that. They are truly alien. It's a true alien phenomena that's come off something that came from somewhere else. Whereas the other is really UPARTs and alternative technology. So that's why there's kind of a few answers to that question. I've handled a lot of crystal skulls, not just my own one, and I'm quite taken with those. And some of the things that get produced, in prehistory. When I was doing a television series back in 2005 through to 2008 called Lost Treasures, we got into all the back rooms of museums. We got into the storerooms and all sorts of things. You flash your ITV pass, and in you go. So I handled some amazing things. I mean, I've handled a first-class ticket from the Titanic, which, was incredible and things like that. But these storerooms are full of things that can't be explained. There's prehistoric round balls, and weird shaped balls, and there's a skull of a Neanderthal with a bullet hole going through it, and it's definitely a bullet hole.
Time travel. Yeah,
because the side that it exits on explodes. So you're talking 160 miles an hour when this thing went through. Otherwise, the damage is consistent forensically with a gunshot. So you get things like, I mean, it could have been a slingshot ball, because they travel at about the same speed.
Sure.
So yes, I've run across tons and tons and tons of stuff like that. But if they've got anything alien in UK, if they've got it anywhere in the storerooms, it's kept under lock and key. And I've talked to a lot of archaeologists as well who would be delighted to divulge anything that's hidden secretly. But very few of them do. They'll take off camera. They'll take a stab at something being extraordinary. We've got crystal balls over here that turn up in burials through the Bronze Age and Iron Age, and these crystal balls are really mysterious. They're highly polished, and it's a ball in a holder. And nowadays, of course, they're scrying balls. We use them for seeing the future and all that. Well, I had a conversation with a guy in Liverpool Museum, and he said, have you never cottoned on this thing could just be a magnifying glass? Maybe it's a fire starter. And the thing is, it works. You can sit there with this ball on a sunny day and you can set fire to something in seconds. Well, that makes far more sense to me. But that is extremely advanced technology.
It is.
carrying a ball round on the belt that can start a fire in about 30 seconds. You know, no banging.
Just polishing something like that would take you forever.
Yeah, but they don't have to bang stones together or rub pieces of wood and, you know, two Boy Scouts, whatever. They don't have to do any of that. They can just start a fire immediately.
Right.
So they knew a thing or two that we've lost as well.
And and even from there, like, where did that technology, how was that taught to them? You know, I've got a friend who was given some artifacts from a sunken city off the coast of England years ago. Back, we're talking like 70s, 80s, you know.
Okay.
And the story goes, I mean, he's been on the show to talk about it. And the story goes, you know, that the person who found them, who's an archaeologist type diver, went down. So there they were. So like, okay, you know, haul them out, and contacted, I think it was the U.S. military, to get some overheads done through satellite imagery. And they're the ones that had control over that. But in doing so, gave access to what this place was. They sent him, you know, the photos and everything else. He paid for them. But now, bam, somebody else knew what it was. Got visited by Men in Black. Yeah. And luckily, he never kept all of the artifacts together. And I guess it spooked him. So he gave this stuff that wasn't confiscated. These MIB confiscated some of these artifacts. But there was still more that was given to this friend of mine. One of those items resembled, I mean, down to a T, a Baghdad battery.
Wow.
Which I believe the original went missing at some point.
Yes, I think they've only got copies now. I think that's all they've got.
Well, this is, he showed it on air, showed pictures. And I was just like, he was telling me that looks like, I'm just like, I know what that looks like. And he goes, yes, under lock and key, undisclosed location. I'm like,
well, Gary's done the same with his debris. I mean, he's got it all together into one case. That case doesn't stay at home. You know, that's another location.
Oh, exactly. But that's what I'm saying. Like, sometimes, you know, sometimes you find these amazing things and they come into your possession. And the reason it exists is because of people like Gary, you know, and my friend who just put it under lock and key. Because some museums, oh, sure, it's great. But I just know with Smithsonian, what happened with bones of giants and stuff. So, you know, they pick and choose if it should be seen or not. Whereas people like Gary and my friend is like, no, this exists. We're putting it out to the world with you and Gary. It's in the form of your book. You know, with my friend, he's like, no, I just come on the air and here it is. Like, show it. We have millions of people who watch. There it is.
I've only run across that once, but it was quite serious. I'm not going to say exactly which site it was,
right?
But I was visiting a site on Malta. Now, as far as Malta's concerned, the whole island of Malta, all of its prehistory, everything, it was linked to Italy.
Yes.
So they always go that way. Italy, it's got to be Italy. It's going off that way. It's European.
Yes.
Now, I was on one of these prehistoric sites and I'm minding my own business. I'm just going around, you know, on the tourist trail. And about 10 foot away from the wall of this site, on the floor is a prehistoric hand axe. Now, at this point, it's being walked on as part of the gravel in the public path. So I'm looking at it and I'm thinking, I'm going to pick that up. There's no way I'm leaving that there. So I photographed where it was in relation to this prehistoric thing, and I picked it up. Now, you can see the bottom of this prehistoric monument, and this axe is probably only, well, less than 30 centimeters lower in the strata than this site. However, it's an Acheulean axe, so you're talking hundreds of thousands BC, not just tens, but hundreds of thousands.
Right.
And it comes from North Africa. That's the other way. That's the opposite direction. So
what the heck?
Well, me being me, I went to the guard on the site and I'm saying, you know, I'm an archaeologist. I'm here from the UK. What do I do with this? And he said, well, you need to go to the museum in Valletta. You need to go and hand it in, obviously. You know, you've made a note of where it is, GPS, photographed it and all the rest. You go and hand it in. So I went to Valletta and I went to their office and I said, where do I hand this in? And basically this woman went, "You haven't shown me that. In fact, you've not even brought it here." She said, "Keep it." She said, "Because if you hand it in, it'll go in a stone chipper. We'll destroy it."
How did you even get that moving around anywhere? It's so easy to do.
I just chucked it in my hand luggage, and I've got it in the office here. Well, what else am I supposed to do with it?
Yeah, you don't want to.
It survived,
No.
potentially, it survived
Yes,
400,000 years. Politically,
Yes.
that's probably the worst thing I could have found on Malta, because they don't want any connection with Africa. Everything. I mean, they've got baby hippos, they've got baby elephant, they've got all that. So it's obviously they are connected to Africa.
Yes.
But when it comes to all these prehistoric monuments, all this, goddess figures and all that stuff, that's all got to be connected to Italy. It can't be connected to anything else. So
goddess figures. Okay, let me tell you, said same friend has over, I don't know, between 30 and 60 statues, rock, very rare ones, okay, from not just said Italy, south of France, Portugal, all through the entire region, Spain.
Yeah.
So it's funny how so much of our history has been kept from us. It's hard for people to digest that we're not the first kick at the can.
Yeah, it's like politics in archaeology. I mean, I've never allowed the two to mix. I don't like the two mixing. But then there is that danger. I mean, another archaeologist who can stay nameless came and shared all of his King Arthur material with me, because he said, "You can't say who you're getting this off because I'll lose my job." So there's always that threat, but I've chosen, I've had my own unit, and we've done our own things, and we've gone off and, I mean, yes, I'm connected to Chester, but I'm not employed by Chester. I am from time to time, but I don't have that faculty connection, so they have no threat. They can't come along and go, "Hey, we're just going to sack you." I'll go, "Hey, well, I wasn't employed in the first place." So
right.
And I've still done what archaeologists do. I've got friends all over the world. I've been all over the world. I've got loads of stuff from all over the world. But my main thing has always been more on the Eric von Daniken side. I've always gone for the mystery. The further left field, the better for me. So,
and it's hard, but it's more acceptable now than it would have been ages ago. Even when Eric von Daniken wrote that book, that was really going out on a limb. He took a chance with his reputation on that, because it wasn't as accepted back then.
I've got a great story. I don't know if I've told you this before, but it's a fabulous story about Eric. It's definitely in subject. It was last year they had the big expo. It's on again this weekend. I'm actually there again Friday, Saturday, Sunday this week.
Oh, very nice.
It's in Manchester this time. It's at Bowler's Exhibition Centre in Manchester. But the previous one they had over at Blackpool. It's where I met Giorgio and I met Eric. But it was funny because I was backstage and they have these round tables covered in sandwiches, you know what I mean, for the speakers and what have you, contributors. And there's this round table and there's Eric sat there, eating his curly crest sandwich, and there's only one chair empty. Now, I'll swear they did this on purpose, because you've got Eric von Daniken, who is absolutely the ultimate, alternative, and me, who's an archaeologist. And they must have put us deliberately next to each other. I'm convinced they did, just to see what would happen. So I'm sat there and I'm eating my butty and Eric's eating his. Now, Eric's he's not very outgoing, but he's limited by the fact that he speaks a Swiss version of German. So English is not his first language. So I'm sat there, he's sat there, and this eerie silence descends on the table, and they're all wondering what's going to happen next. So I looked at Eric and I just went, I said, that book you wrote? I said, Chariot of the Gods. I said, my dad had it on his bookshelf. And I said, I read that when I was training as an archaeologist. And I said, what a fantastic book. I said, I don't necessarily agree with everything that's in it. I said, but boy, did you make us think. You made us look at things in a different way. So all the stuff we would otherwise have taken for granted and just accepted on face value, you made us question that. Anyway, Eric puts his sandwich down and he looks at me and he goes, there are 267 question marks in that book. And then he just leans back and goes back to eating his sandwich again. So that's all he wanted to do. The whole point of Chariot of the Gods was to make people stop and think. And in a way, we hit it off straight away. We clicked because he started that process, and I'm the end result.
Right.
You know, I'm the student that popped out at the other end as a result of what he'd written, and I followed Eric's career.
A new generation of archaeologists.
Well, I'm new old now. I mean,
but upcoming. It set precedents moving forward for people in your field.
Yes, it did. It meant we could look at things and we could speculate. Whereas up to that point, certainly in the 60s and 70s, you weren't allowed to speculate. The idea was that you had something and then you went and identified it in another report. So you would quote somebody else in identifying whatever it was that you had. You weren't allowed to say, well, maybe they're wrong, and maybe it's not that at all.
It's just standard academia. So because I know several archaeologists, and they get pretty hostile if you try to go off the path a bit. As I have a couple of friends who are archaeologists, and I said, okay, I'll ask you the same question: who built the pyramids? They got hostile over that question.
Well, yeah. I mean, my first response is there's a lot of pyramids, so I presume you mean the big ones on Giza. And I can speak firsthand again because I've been in them. It was amazing.
I've been to Giza. Yeah, I love it.
Well, we all piled in. We had an hour in the King's Chamber with the lights switched off, and we all had musical instruments. So that was loads of fun. But that's perhaps a story for another day. All I can tell you is it certainly wasn't Khufu. When you speak to the archaeologists on the Giza Plateau, they know, for example, that under one corner of that Great Pyramid, there were burials that go back all the way to 4,500 BC. And they had to move those burials in order to put the pyramid on them. So that means if those burials are that age, therefore, when they got round to building the pyramid and they disturbed the burials, then chances are the pyramid is around about the same age as the burials were moved, if that makes sense.
Yes.
There's a link there. So there's a lot going on that plateau. There's a lot happening before Khufu. And also, if you speak to the archaeologists, the idea that Khufu signed the pyramid is very speculative. It's a bit of Victorian nonsense, really.
Yes.
There has been very recently some question as to whether that cartouche is actually a fake, and the guy that claimed it was Khufu has actually put it on there himself to try,
which is normal for kings at the time. Yeah.
Again, just because something's written on it, if you stick a Coca-Cola advert on a Victorian building, doesn't mean it's the same age as Coca-Cola. It doesn't make any sense.
Exactly. The kings did that. They always put their own cartouche over the previous kings.
They
this is quite normal. Yes.
I mean, the kicker on the Giza Plateau is the Sphinx. There's no doubt about it. That's water-worn.
Yes.
And it definitely points at Leo in 10,500 BC. So that's where it all starts. It starts with the Sphinx. But they've been a bit naughty over the years because the second Sphinx has been demolished. That was demolished a couple of 100 years ago. So there's bits missing from the Giza Plateau that gives you the illusion that things were different. But no, the more they're finding out about the pyramid, the more they're beginning to realise that it is a lot older than it appears to be.
Right.
And having been there, it is an amazing piece of technology. It's incredible.
It is incredible. I mean, I spent some time there, and the whole frequency thing is fascinating to me. Vibration frequency. There was never a burial. It was never a burial, no matter what they try to tell.
Well, let me tell you a story that feeds.
I paid my way all over that pyramid. Let me tell you something. I've been in every freaking angle of that.
Yeah,
pyramid.
we did that as well.
Handsomely.
Yeah, we did that. We went everywhere, all over. Baksheesh, which is what you pay them. Yeah, we went everywhere.
Yes.
and all got jelly belly off the money, which is where it comes from. So, but the story I'm going to tell is when we actually played the music, because what we did was we all sat around on the floor in the King's Chamber. I think I had a drum, and we had a sistrum and a couple of guitars and a few other bits and bobs and bells and whatnot, and we just jammed. We just jammed for an hour. Well, number one, we tried to record it. Well, the tape recorder, the digital recorder, and the phones that were recording all failed. All of them failed. We got no recordings out of that at all. Yeah, and the batteries on some of them drained so that they were flat, even brand new batteries. So that was the first big surprise. Second surprise was once we started playing, the only thing that you were aware of was the tiny bit of stone that you were sat on. and everything else vanished. So you weren't getting any echoes. There was nothing coming back. I don't know where the sound was going. It just went on forever in every direction. And it was like you were floating in black space. And everybody had the same experience. Even though we knew that there were other people in there, we didn't know where anybody else was. And it happened within minutes. You know, it was like we'd entered a vortex or a void or a black hole or, you know, whatever. Everything we were doing just got eaten by the pyramid. It just vanished. So I don't know if anybody else has tried doing anything with audio in the King's Chamber in the dark, but that's what happened to us. Now, of course, there are those other chambers above the King's Chamber that they're all resonant at different frequencies. So clearly ordinary primitive music played on primitive instruments must resonate, you know, in some way. But now you're into the realms of alien technology, alternative dimensions. You know, you're back on theme again. Absolutely,
it's an exceptional structure, and I truly believe, because, you know, there are those, this was built first, or this was built first. You know, the step pyramid or the bent pyramid. I believe the ancients, there's evidence of it all over the world, emulated what they respected, or what they were in awe of, or what they were trying to understand, or, you know, what they experienced, they would try to recreate, because there's hundreds of pyramids all over Egypt.
They're in every country. Everybody. We even had a pyramid here in Wales at one point, a huge mountain called the Gop with an artificial top built on it. You know, so they're everywhere. It was known as the White Pyramid of Wales. It was there up to a few hundred years ago. The biggest pyramid in the world's in China. The oldest one, I think, at the moment, they think might be in Russia, but they've just found one in Bolivia.
That's right.
Older.
That's
you know,
right.
So
they believe Russia is like the cradle of time. They've renamed it, like with this one structure. So it is very fascinating when they're popping up all over the world. But what's even more fascinating is that it's believed that they have them on the moon.
Well, you're going to get me started. Don't get me started on the moon. Oh, dearie me. I mean, only today they've popped up all these photographs of, like, the moon lander from India. And it just looks like a PlayStation 1, you know, computer generated emoticon thing. And it's like, oh, give me strength. And it's like, they show it, you know, there it is. Oh yeah, here we go. It's landing on the moon, you know, and all that. And it's coming down. And who the hell filmed it? Who filmed that?
Satellite imagery is what I think they're saying. I know.
No, I'm not buying it at all. I'm not buying it.
I'm just the messenger.
Yeah, another topic altogether. You know, I'm fairly convinced you can't get off the planet, but that's you know, that's a whole topic all of its own. You know,
Right. So you're not an exopolitic guy by any means. So, I know. See what I mean about just stuff floating around? Like there's this belief that we have this huge space fleet up there, and
and we've got colonies on Mars and all sorts of stuff. And India's gone all the way to the moon to find water on the South Pole, but it can't find water in its own country. Oh, you know, it's just it's whatever paradigm that people buy into. You know, it's trying to sort out the science fiction from the science fact is
tough.
Becoming a major issue. It is becoming a major issue. I have done a couple of interviews based on the moon, and I don't know if they're still up. You know, it's I have an extremely negative view of lunar landing.
Go ahead, do it. We're in the theme. Just
okay. Well, The real kicker, I mean, I've ended a couple of books where I have speculated. I mean, I did Crystal Skulls and Human Heads, and that was looking at the crystal planet and the way the planet operated and the way that the upper atmosphere operates. Right. And when this book comes out, I'm looking at the operation of time. So I've got a closing chapter that has a different theme to it. But certainly in Crystal Skulls, when you try and fire something off planet Earth, you've got these two Van Allen belts with a kind of a sweet zone in between. And excuse me, it's extremely hard to get anything through the Van Allen belts. The first one you can probably just about get through. So satellites, space shuttles, all that kind of thing, they get through into the sweet zone, which is what they call inner space. It's not outer space, it's inner space. It's still inside the gravitational pull of the Earth.
Right.
When you get beyond that, the second Van Allen belt, it would be like pushing a tin can through 1,000, gunshots. You'd never get anything through it. It would just be torn to ribbons by that debris, that flying debris. Now that's been accepted for years, probably 100 years or more, that those belts are there. So the idea that we could get something that looked a bit like the lunar lander, you know what I mean, and fire that out through that alone, that's not particularly believable. Let's assume, though, that you could, and this tin can, full of big switches and condensation and tin foil, and let's assume it manages to get out there. What about solar radiation? Heat and cold? What about all the stuff that we know now is flying around in space? Cometary debris, meteorites. It's not space. Is not
about
space.
All the modern day shuttles.
They're all in inner space. They all go into inner space. So when you get photographs of that curved planet, and you can see these things, they're still inside the outer Van Allen belt.
Got it. Okay.
So when they say, "Oh yeah, we're going to fire tourists into space," no, they're not. They're firing them into inner space.
Right.
They're not firing them out into the cosmos. You know what I mean?
Right.
Which does make you wonder how they'd get satellites out to things like Mars and Mercury and this, that, and the other. But I did, on a recent interview, I did make a point actually that nobody has ever taken a photograph of space. It's never been done, because all of it is data. When it comes back, it's zeros and ones. So when you see these incredible photographs of outer space from the Hubble telescope, it's a bloke at a laptop doing CGI based on zeros and ones. That's what it is. No human eyes have actually gone click with a camera and photographed that. Nobody's ever done that. And that is true of every single thing that we've ever seen to do with outer space. It's all, well, if you think about it, it has to be. It is. And it's so obvious. It's so glaringly obvious that nobody's actually bothered to.
Inner space is a different thing, though.
Inner space is different. I believe you can probably get through the lower Van Allen belt. You can get through that. Although it's getting harder. I think in the 1990s, there was something like 220,000 objects trapped in orbit in that bit. And now I think the Russians have estimated there's 460,000 pieces of rubbish trapped in that belt now, because the more stuff we chuck up there, the more rubbish ends up getting trapped by the Earth's upper atmosphere.
Right.
So it's getting harder and harder. And I think it was a German scientist who said it will get to the point where you won't be able to go out to that bit of space either. Inner space will become inaccessible to us because of the amount of debris that's flying around out there. So what I would call proper scientists that do study things like this, that know about gravitational pull, they know about the limits of what can and can't be done. The proper scientists are actually all singing off the same hymn sheet, but none of them have stuck their head above the foxhole and gone, "Hey, we never went."
Right.
Nobody's done that yet.
So you don't believe they made it to the moon?
No, it's ridiculous. I mean, one small step for a man, and he's coming down the step ladders, and yet full colour photo on Time magazine, his legs sticking out, but on the piece of video, it's not. And it's the first footprint on the moon, so he goes into the dust, and the footprint doesn't match the shoe that you can see that he's wearing, which doesn't match the one in the museum that NASA have got. So none of the footprints match. So they're clearly not right. So the one in Buzz Aldrin's book, that's not the first footprint on the moon. And then the next question is, if he's the first bloke on the moon, who filmed him?
Right.
Who was operating the camera? And the best one of the lot for that one is that beautiful shot of the lander, and you get that big boof, and all the debris flies at the camera, and then it pans up and it follows the little capsule returning back to Earth.
So did they leave the guy on the planet on the moon?
Yeah. That poor bloke operated the camera.
Buddy. No room at the end.
Absolutely perfect pan shot going up of this thing going up. It's just complete nonsense. There's no stars. You can see floodlights reflected. There's areas lit that wouldn't have been lit if it was just sunlight. You've got the flag doing this.
I'll tell you a story. My mother worked with this priest who worked at a planetarium. Okay, Northern Canada. It was her job. He would do a photo analysis for NASA Of course, everything comes you all blacked out. You just got to see
Yeah.
the picture. It was just her job to just categorize it, and he analyzed it. That's as far as it went. During the moon landing, astronauts were sent to this city in the north because the terrain resembled the moon. So they went to practice there. And she said it was curiosity because, they were affiliated with this university, this big planetarium. And she goes, we were in constant communication with the astronauts, like daily, which would have been really hard. So and as she got older, she just find it amusing. She says it was interesting because every day I'd be talking to this guy who's he's on the moon or prepping to go on the moon, and I'm wondering now, in lieu of everything that you're saying that's making sense, if they actually filmed it there as well, because they called it, and this is for those of you who want to go check it out. Moon City was the nickname. Was Moon City.
Well, you had that disclosure just before he died, Stanley Kubrick. You had that interview where he basically went, I did it. I filmed it. There's been lots of other photographs leaked that seem to show that it's a set.
Right.
In Diamonds Are Forever, for example, Ian Fleming did not put in the moon buggy ride. It's not in that story at all, but it's in the movie. And you got all these guys, bouncing around in weightless. And
sure.
007 steals the moon buggy and off he goes. Right. So was that a clue? Are they leaving breadcrumbs, to tell us how it was done? And then you've got different Apollo landings that you've got different photographs from that all have the same skyline, even though they're supposed to be on different bits of the moon. That doesn't make any sense. There's outtakes of the astronauts falling over when they're clearly on wires and they have to upright themselves. NASA have conveniently lost all the archive, all the footage has conveniently disappeared. So they haven't got anything now that they can show.
Well, you could analyze it now.
Well, you could do, and some people have. And there was one that was leaked, which was the reel of them communicating with the astronauts. And there's that 3-minute delay that there was in communication. This particular reel has got the director telling them what to do and what to say in the gap on the reel. So by the time you finish, when you join all these dots up, they're clearly on a stage set. They're not on the moon at all. It's absolutely nonsense. It's just, and all the footage. If you slow it, if you speed it up by 50%, exactly half, it goes back into real time. So all this, you know what I mean, and all the dust, boom, and all this kind of thing. As soon as you speed that up by 50%, it goes straight back into normal time, and that's how it was filmed. And they just slowed it down by half. So it's just ridiculous. And how would they get any of that material back as well, through space with all the solar flares, the solar radiation and that? You're talking about Hasselblad film here that wouldn't go through a scanner at an airport. If you put it through an airport scanner, it destroyed the roll of film. So how did they get that back from space? None of it's possible. It can't be done.
Right.
The more you go down that rabbit hole, the more it falls apart. I mean, I had a friend years ago, this lady that used to do the antiques with my mum and dad. And as a girl, she met Buzz Aldrin doing a talk at a planetarium. I think it's in Liverpool. And Buzz said to her, I've got a couple of little samples here of moon rock that, I'm allowed to give out to certain people for promotion, so you want one. And she's only a tiny girl. I think she's only about 6 years old or 7 years old. She goes, oh, yeah, I'll have one of those. So she gets given this little tube with this grey rock in it. Fast forward to when she becomes an adult and she's now working in a science lab. She decides to test it. And it comes back as concrete. It's concrete dyed with grey dye. Now, since that story, which I was told in the 1980s, all the moon rock has disappeared out of all the museums. It's all gone. You can't find any of it because it all turned out to be cement, concrete, dyed grey. That's what it all was. So that really just, and Buzz,
there it is.
As Buzz Aldrin's getting older, he's dropped some real clangers as people have chased him with cameras. You know what I mean? Honestly, he won't swear.
The reason they never went back to the moon is what you're saying is because they could never get there in the first place.
No, No. So that brings us now to, hey, India, we've landed on the southern pole of the moon, and in this little thing that looks like a PlayStation graphics, it's no, they're just doing the same thing again, but on a different continent with a different script.
So then you get into the whole exopolitics where people claim that they were held hostage at bases on the moon, etc. It's you don't know.
Well, do you know what? If they have got an area that resembles the moon, if you were to suddenly wake up in a pod, on an area like that, then you're going to believe that it's happened for real, because it's real. That's your reality, even if it might be.
Who knows what people are implanting, or
Mars could be a desert in Mongolia where there isn't anybody.
Sure.
Else. Who knows? But
sure.
And
I agree with you.
There's a lot of things we can do now to create things that are real.
Right. I agree.
I'd be questioning the reality if I got abducted and woke up on Mars. I'd be like, oh, all right then, okay.
I know.
Yeah,
I'll have another. Yeah, that's just.
Yeah, I don't know what was in that last one, but I'll have 10.
But I want another one. Yes.
Ooh,
oh wow! No, you know what? That's really interesting, because I've had people come on before and talk about a few occasions, the moon and the moon landing, and this isn't something that's been really discussed thoroughly with respect to imagery and not being able to get off the planet, and as to why. Because the flat earthers say that there's never been a picture taken of space. How do you know? And you can't argue it.
No.
How do we know?
I mean, I got into the photographic side of it because there was a guy in the 1990s. He wrote a book. He was a photographer, nothing to do with science, nothing to do with space. And he just got hold of loads of the NASA photographs and just tore into them. I think he got something like 90 faults in one of these shots. There were reflections, the lighting, everything, and he tore into it. And before he'd actually written the book, I met him doing a talk at a conference, and we sat there over a beer for a couple of hours. And honestly, the things he told me, they're all in the book. I mean, you can go and find it. It's 19. I can't remember his name, but it's a book about the photographs. It just focuses solely on the NASA photos.
Right.
And he managed to get this big thick book out of it, and he absolutely tore the photographs to shreds, so much so that I think NASA actually came out and went, okay, well, we really went to the moon, but we couldn't do the photographs, so we faked the photographs when we came back.
It's a stretch, but okay.
Wow. Oh, okay, there goes another excuse.
Wow, that's interesting. That's interesting. Things are not always as they seem.
Nope.
I mean, can you imagine, though, what they're trying to put off now? Which is, again, when you talk about Project Bluebeam, and they're already showing they can do amazing things with lasers in the sky.
Oh, yeah.
Whales just flying through the air.
Dragons and all sorts.
Yeah. So, I think if they were brazen enough to try to pull that off in the first place, I can only imagine what they're going to do with all of this now that there is CGI technology, AI, things like that.
Segues nicely back into flying saucers, UFOs.
Let's do it.
Yeah, which bits are them and which bits are us? And if we do have a second coming, is it real or is it staged? It's what do we believe?
So let's go here. Because I know we're inching down to like 20 minutes or something. But let's go here. Are they, with the false flags, trying to instill so much fear as a control thing that when it happens and ET comes through and look, we are friendly, we are benevolent, we are trying to help you, did they just want us to turn them away? Like I don't understand. That's the aspect of it. What is the big deal in having communication?
It depends. I don't know how far they're willing to go with smoke and mirrors.
Right.
And the problem is that you've only got the smoke and mirrors. The thing that you're missing is whatever it is they're trying to hide. Because obviously they've done a brilliant job of hiding it. So that's invisible, that's gone. So it's easy for conspiracy theorists and professionals and scientists and people we can tear into the fake stuff. It's easy to do that because there are ways, clearly, of silly things like who filmed it. It's quite easy to tear some of that apart. But then the question of what they're trying to hide, they've done such a good job of hiding it that it's very hard to get a firm fix on that. There's a couple of ideas, though. One goes back to where we came in at the beginning, which is if you've had over 90 years, if you've had 100 years since the Second World War to develop technology, then chances are you're going to have a bucket load of stuff that you don't want anyone to know about, especially if it's Chinese versus Russia versus America versus Europe versus, they're not going to want each other to know what the other has got. So that's the obvious reason that they're keeping a lot of the technology.
Well, and the war machine, you need an enemy to keep generating hundreds of billions of dollars every year.
Yeah. And then you've also got this question, well, if they've gone that far with technology, have they got anything in that technology that's really going to upset society? Which, again, we hinted at the beginning with, medical developments and that. If you really knew where half of them came from, there'd be mass protests and certain paradigms would disappear. Well, maybe the same thing is true of technology. If we knew where some of the technology came from, and we also knew what some of the technology was capable of, there might be mass public outcry, like when they decided to put CERN over in France and build this huge reactor thing, let's create a black hole in a reactor. Right. Everybody just went bonkers. It's like, you can't possibly do that.
But they think we shifted. We're in a different reality. I believe it.
What's going to happen? The whole world's going to get sucked into a black hole, and so maybe, just maybe, they've got even worse than that. Maybe they've managed to crack time. Maybe they've cracked space. Maybe we don't have to die. Well, how are you going to decide if there's, 800 million people or however many million there are now on planet Earth? How are you going to decide who's going to live and who's going to die? It would just create chaos.
Question.
Chaos. Well, I don't have an answer to that. They clearly do have an answer to that, and that is watch the smoke and mirrors. That's what they're doing. And as the technology and what they're capable of and everything else has developed, and it's got greater and greater and greater, then so has the Hollywood side of it, the smoke and mirrors side of it has increased as well. So they are using some of that technology now to cover up their own technology. And this business of is it or isn't it? Is it real or is it fake? Is it them or is it us? That's a brilliant way of putting enough doubt into the system for us to not necessarily recognize what it is we're looking at. So, that's where I think they're going with it. And it's the same thing they've been doing since the Second World War. They did it at Roswell and they're still doing it. They're doing exactly the same thing. It's like time travel. Let's think of UFOs as being they're non-dimensional and they're not tied down by time and space, so they can go anywhere, they can do anything, etc., etc. You're going to find out pretty quickly whether the world is going to come to an end and how, and possibly when. So how are you going to tell anybody that? I wouldn't want the job of doing that. I don't envy them. These guys in grey suits whose names we don't know, who, supposedly form some kind of, amazing international world government or whatever. The people that you never get to hear about, who are definitely hidden by the smoke and mirrors. How do these people make those kind of decisions?
It's a tough call. It's a tough call. But it would also explain if you're seeing less actual extraterrestrial activity in the skies.
Yeah.
They're going to avoid us like the plague. So all you're going to see is us in the skies, because they're like, we already know what's going to happen to you. We want to be as far away from you guys as possible.
Yeah.
So it's a double-edged sword, right?
Well, what I said in the Crystal Skulls book is I actually think that the plan of time, so if you look at the whole of planet Earth, I don't think we're just going to go boom and disappear. We're not going to have a Star Wars moment where the planet explodes. I don't think that's how we end. If there is an end, I think it doesn't actually reach an end. It just becomes something else, and then it becomes something else, and so on. I think it's cyclical. That's what I believe anyway. But I think in the distant, very distant past, call it Atlantis or Lemuria or whatever you want to call it, somebody somewhere could have actually solved the problem of time travel. And what I say in Crystal Skulls and Human Heads is that that's going to cause a problem, because if you suddenly go, oh, fantastic, let's go back in time, you're going to cause a paradox. You're going to go back and screw up your own timeline. So you can't go backwards,
right?
But there's nothing stopping you from going forwards,
right?
Because you're not going to mess anything up.
That's
if
right.
you suddenly appear at a critical point in history to have a look at what's going to happen in the future. You're not going to mess that up.
Right.
And that's what I think we're seeing. I think these alien craft and what have you, I think the real thing is basically this civilization from the distant past coming to see how things are starting to wrap up now, which then explains things like abductions, cattle mutilations, all the tests that they're doing on the environment. You know, the fact that they actually look like us could be that they're actually a different species of us.
More
you know,
evolved.
more evolved, more advanced, you know, from the past. It's just a nice, neat way of looking at it that wraps everything up, which then, like you say, you're going to see loads of activity because, you know, who knows what's coming. And then if they all disappear all of a sudden, so like if we have one particular...
Then we know we're in trouble.
Yeah, it's oh no.
It's close.
Where have they gone? You know?
I know. Come back, save us. Yeah, take us off the planet. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, yes. Wow, that's... Boy, it's a lot of food for thought, and I'm glad we were able to get into all of that. So let's get into real quickly again the book.
Yeah, we can do that.
How to find you, where they're going to be able to get the book, yada, yada, yada.
Okay, Europe's Roswell, it's due out officially at the moment, I say, hopefully complete on the 1st of November. And it will have loads and loads of new material in it. If it's not in it when it comes out, then it'll have loads of material, you know, coming out from it. It's definitely a story that you want to look into. You know, it's dead real. You know, the material's there. It's out there. You can find out about that. So if you want any books, any of my books, all 9 books are on Amazon. So type me in, OLLY, and you'll get, you know, Robin Hood and Green Man and Crystal Skulls and King Arthur, which has just come out. You know, that's a bit of a monster. All of those are on Amazon. You'll get all of that there. If anybody wants to find me, really simple, Facebook. Come and friend me on Facebook, you know, as long as your name's not Fifi Trixabel and you got a picture of a unicorn, in which case I'll just not take you seriously. If you're a real person, I'll almost certainly accept you. So yeah, I'm on. So it's Amazon for product and Facebook for me. It really is that simple.
Nice and easy. I love it.
Keep it simple.
So I believe we have you back on in November the 15th to talk about Robin Hood.
Yes, and it's Robin Hood / the Knights Templar. Because there is a link. There is a link. So I got a feeling it's going to be a game of 2 halves.
I love it. I love it.
Yeah, we'll start with Robin and see where it takes us.
See, there we go, people. We know where that's going to go because we always kind of go around and come back. So
we managed to stay on theme anyway. So tonight
we did. It was great. Yeah. I love it. I caught everything, which is wonderful. But hey, you know, it's what's buzzing out there, and it's what people are super interested in, and they're just hanging back over here to wait to see what the U.S. military and government is going to come out with in a few days. If I'm not mistaken, it's a few days from what I'm told. So we're ahead of the game, and your book, which again is Europe's Roswell, 40 years since impact from flying disc press, November the 1st, which is going to be out just on the heels of all of that craziness.
That's me publisher. He knows what he's doing.
He does. He does. Because there's a picture book, people. We love those. It's like show and tell. Right? Yeah, which I think is fantastic. So thank you again for joining me. It's just always such a pleasure. I always have so much fun with you, and it's always nice sharing a couple of hours and jamming and getting bouncing thoughts around, etc. And I love your expertise and your research. So thank you for that.
Loads of fun. Can't wait for the next one.
Woohoo. All right, darling. Thank you. And
soon.
have yourself I guess, terrific night for you.
Oh, we will do. We'll enjoy it.
All right. Bye-bye. Well, we've come to the end of another fantastic segment on the Outer Realm. Thank you to Mark Olly. Thank you to our sponsors, Folgers, Justin Snicker, Steve McGinnis. We appreciate you so very much. Next week, we welcome the return of our dear friend Michael Carter, who's again going to be talking UFOs, disclosure, false flags, exopolitics, because he's really versed in that, and pros and cons. You're going to hear all about it. Thursday night, we welcome back the return of Chris Stiles, who will be discussing Cape Sable Island UFO incident in Canada. So we get a little bit of Canadian content there, which is always nice. So in the meantime, people, have yourselves a great weekend. We will see you next week. Good night.